I'm Kyle Maxwell. I'm going to be giving a talk today about JRuby in the wild, which is basically going to be a talk about my experiences with JRuby in a startup environment. Basically, I work for Casttv. We're a video search engine, and we've been using Ruby as our primary language for the 7 months that I've been there. And before that, with the founders, using Ruby to set up a lot of the infrastructure as well. A little bit about my background. I started out as a programmer when I was young and self-taught, and brought it through with college, where I got a degree in computational physics and was basically putting myself through school doing web programming, a variety of things. I made the jump in 2004 from PHP to Rails, and that's how I got introduced to the Ruby community. And from then on, I've been moving into more of the back-end infrastructure that's been required to run a search engine. So Casttv, a little bit about us that's going to differentiate us from the typical JRuby, quote-unquote typical JRuby target audience person, is that we're a small startup. We've got a small team. We're still under 10 people, but we've got a big problem. Video search is hard. It's an order of magnitude harder than normal search because the data isn't readily available for you in free text. So we need to be efficient with our time. We need to really just drag the most out of every day, and we're working in startup years, which is kind of like dog years, where it just doesn't match up to normal time. And we don't have time for not invented here. So we're really looking for any tool we can. Let's see. So I'm somewhat of a newbie to JRuby. I got introduced to it in April at RailsConf. I was doing some pair programming with Seth Fitzsimmons, who's in the audience somewhere, I think. And we put together a demo of using Lucene integrated directly with JRuby. And then from there, it really piqued my interest, and I was able to find out that it solved a lot of the problems that I face on a day-to-day basis. My background in Java was limited to probably about 2 courses in computer science in college. I had evaluated Java for use at a previous startup, and we went away from it because of the complexity that I saw in most of the application stacks. I couldn't tell the difference between what is Tapestry, what is Spring. Like, we had 2 weeks to make an evaluation decision, and I sat there and I was like, this is a lot to learn in 2 weeks. I'm going to go with this Rails thing. I kind of like Ruby. It's straightforward. So that's my Java background, and I've been kind of picking it up as I go. But yeah, 2 classes in computer science in college. So today we're going to talk about, in a sense, what motivated my movement into JRuby, and we're going to give some tips and tricks for working with JRuby, and hopefully have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, because I don't know if I can anticipate all the questions people will have. So JRuby itself is basically Ruby on the JVM, as you'd expect. And that's really where you get a lot of value, is the actual JVM itself has been around for 10, 15 years, has seen a lot of active development, a lot of money thrown into it, and it has been pretty well optimized. So it's a good platform to run things on. And then the second thing that you get out of it is you get access to native Java things. Just a little example there of popping into JRuby. The -R Java gives you the require Java, which gives you access to the Java namespace. And you can do things like access Java data structures. In this case, a tree map, which is basically like a hash, except it's sorted and it uses a different backing. So you can see that one of the interesting things that you can do here is you can access it in a way that is idiomatic of Ruby. You can use inject, because the Java collections include enumerable by default. So it's kind of an obscure inject, but you can call each on them, you can call map on them, and that's nice. So to get started with the why JRuby part of the talk, really the motivation for the enterprise has always been clear. And when you think of the enterprise, you think of something like this that I dragged off the web somewhere, at least in the Ruby community. And you've got this idea that we've got Java, we're comfortable with Java, we like it, and we want to be able to adapt and be cool and be on Web 2.0. So you've got people trying to update to this new paradigm where Rails is agile and Java is not. And this has been a pretty clear sell because you've got the productivity of Rails, you have the deploy of Java. You're happy in that you are able to use the tools that you're familiar with, whether it's profiling or libraries that you're accustomed to, or the authentication systems you've used in the past. You're really able to use what you've already got. You've already made an investment, and your people already know Java, and you're happy. However, I'm really trying to make a push not to sell this to the enterprise, because I think that we've heard that talk, most of us. And I'm really trying to say that as a startup, as a small business, as an independent consultant, that to you, JRuby can still have value because it solves problems that you need. And I kind of want to get past, and I think as a Ruby community, we're starting to get past it. The whole, I think around 2005, 2006, we kind of hit like the peak of the anti-Java experience at good old Canada on Rails. So, and I just want to get past that, and that after we're over saying that that Ruby is the end-all and be-all of all our problems, while it's a great language, it doesn't necessarily solve everything in its current incarnation, and that the best thing to do is to pick the right tool for the right job. And this is something that, as a community, I think that we've said a lot and that we've acknowledged it along with being dry as one of the principles that we are wishing to uphold as a community. And I'm really happy to suggest JRuby as being part of that Ruby philosophy. So picking the right tool for the right job has different dependencies built into it. The first dependency is on your organization. For some organizations, JRuby is a great fit because they have a Java background. For some organizations, it's a really poor fit because no one there knew Java in the past. I feel like Java is something that's well documented, well covered in books, well covered in tutorial sessions that you can attend around the country. So it's not hard to pick up. So as a startup, I feel like as a startup, we tend to employ generalists, that we tend to look for people who are very capable of handling a wide variety of things, because you don't have the opportunity to specialize like you do in a large organization where one person can have their expertise in a certain thing. So I feel that learning JRuby is something that, as a startup, that we've been able to invest in pretty easily, and it's worked for us. And then, of course, you have to juggle the specific situations of whatever your code is doing at the moment and whether it's a good fit. So hopefully you don't get too many languages involved, otherwise things might get a little messy. And so there's this sense where at the same time you have to keep languages under control. Ruby itself. Ruby, as we all know here, being I expect mostly Ruby programmers, is just a great general purpose language. It's the language you want to program in day-to-day because it's eloquent, it expresses what you're trying to say in a very concise way. It allows you a lot of flexibility as you program. And it's just a great language. So I don't want to move away from it, but at the same time, there's a couple of things that I find it lacking in, at least in its current incarnation. And the first one of those things is performance. So JRuby, and not to confuse the performance debate with the scaling debate, it's clear that scaling is a function of architecture, and performance is a function of kind of the language implementation. And you can serve, if you say you're a web app, you can serve, if you're doing a very complex task, it's potentially possible that you could still scale that up to, say, 1,000 requests a second. But at the same time, if the performance of each of those requests was on the order of, say, 2 seconds per request, then you'd have a very unsatisfying user experience. So at some point, as we develop our web app and as we develop our search engine, performance will matter because Google set a standard of people need to see pages in a sub-half-second time range. So we want to be able to achieve that. And the other thing we need to be able to achieve is library support. Ruby has a lot of great libraries, and they've got a lot of bindings to great libraries. There are definitely libraries that are written in either Java, C, or other languages that are just, the equivalent is not available, certainly not in pure Ruby. And an example of that would be something like the Weka machine learning library. It's an expansive Java library that lets you do all sorts of machine learning tasks, and Ruby hasn't gotten there. I've looked at some rubygems, like the classifier gem, for example, and it'll just barf when you go over trying to classify, say, more than a couple thousand entities at a time, in my experience. So there's a subset of libraries for which Ruby is very great, and there's a subset of libraries for which you either need to bind or bring in another language. And given that that's the case, I feel like there's some room for improvement in Ruby. I would love to contribute more to Ruby than I currently do. I've been contributing some bug fixes to JRuby at the moment, and I wish that as a startup we had the resources to be able to contribute wholeheartedly to a language for more time than we are. But really, as a startup, we really have to be heads down working on products most of the time and being able to get to market and not burn through all the money our investors have for us. So we can still patch, but it can't be our primary focus. So at this point, we have to start looking at expanding our tool set. So you can make the choice to move things down to C using the current MRI implementation. And for us, we didn't have people who have been programming in C for a long time. The people who we have would prefer high-level languages. Also, I feel like as someone who's, all of us here are working in Ruby, which is a high-level language, and I feel like the highest level you can solve a problem is probably ideal. So I prefer not to go to C. I'd prefer not to think about buffer overflows or think about any sorts of these things. And maybe that is easy to get around and details a little bit of my experience with C, but that's something I didn't want to go towards. So Java became appealing for not only that reason, that you don't have to deal with memory management or any low-level things, but the ability to stay object-oriented in a very strong way was also appealing. So again, that may be different for your organization. So back to just using the right tools. So in some of the choices that I've made, just going to go through 3 of them right now pretty quickly. For Rails, currently sticking with Matt's Ruby implementation for the moment for a number of reasons, and that could change in the future. The reasons are that I'm personally not comfortable with exposing all that is Rails in all of the things that are under the covers to what may be a non-optimized corner of the JRuby implementation, that where this one part of Rails conflicts with this one part of JRuby, and because they're both such big implementations, I don't want to be spending time thinking about that when it's not necessary. And one of the examples of where that may happen, and this is not an indictment of anything that is going wrong in JRuby, it's just saying that I'm uncertain about it and so therefore unwilling to push that way yet, is with the regular expressions library. I know that they're migrating regular expressions libraries at the moment, and Rails is fairly regular expression heavy. So everything already works in CRuby/MRI, and I'm familiar with the whole mongrel Capistrano regular Rails deploy infrastructure, so it hasn't been compelling to switch yet. So the second area, and one where we did make the switch, was in the JRuby/Java implementation of the core search that we do. So we needed to look for a library that would provide a foundation for building a web-scale search engine. Some people build that completely from scratch. We knew that we wouldn't have to parse and go through and index every document on the web. It would just be every video on the web, which gave us a little bit of flexibility because that's a slightly smaller number. So our philosophy is we're going to take an engine that is currently out there in open source, and we are going to use it as a base and write pretty extensively on top of it and try to create something that is a good combination of that foundation and and then our own algorithms and our own scaling techniques, etc. So initially, we tried MRI/Ferret. So we were using the normal Ruby with the Ferret search engine, and we ran into a lot of limitations with that. The C was painful to extend. It was written with 32-bit compatibility in mind, so if your indexes get beyond a certain point in size, something like at several million documents, you get to a point where now your indexes are bigger than 2 gigs, you run into large file size issues, and then I had to port the whole thing to 64-bit compatibility, which was just a nightmare. So given that it's a port and that it doesn't have the amount of maintainers that the original had, it made sense to look beyond that. The next thing we looked at doing was looking at Solar, which is Lucene, but in a Java application server, just kind of isolated as its own service, talking XML and HTTP to everybody else. So we decided to go against that, primarily because we didn't want the overhead of running that extra Java application server, and because we didn't know if the internals would be flexible enough that if you add that extra layer, now we've got to fix the extra layer, or now we've got to maintain an extra layer when it may not do what we want it to do. So the thing that made sense was to build off of a Lucene JRuby low-level thing where we're interfacing directly with the Lucene library, pulling those Java classes into JRuby, and being able to write bindings and additional extensions in both a combination of Ruby and Java, depending on our mostly performance needs. It's relatively easy to maintain. I find that interacting with a Java project versus a C project has been better, because as things change and as I try to extend the Java, I've got a clear method of extending it rather than patching it, and there's less to break because the tooling and the tests around it are a little bit clearer in that you can see what's going on. For example, in your IDE, if something changes, you'll see errors that pop up. And it's nice to be working with a project that has something on the order of 20 committers that are active in some way, and able to provide a lot of velocity for that project itself. So in regards to that, I just wanted to bring up the general point of should you be looking at a port, an API, or a binding? When you start looking at including external libraries into your Ruby projects, what is the best case? And my advice is don't ever port anything. So when you decide to port something, you're incurring a lot of extra overhead in the time, in the work that it takes for you to bring that thing from another language into your language, which is Ruby. The implementation may not be designed to make that transition. You're supporting it yourself without the benefit of a community. Maybe a community will come later, but it ends up being a lot of work. If you absolutely need to port it, then of course you're going to disregard me, but I just don't recommend it. It hasn't been good to me. So the next opportunity is to build an API like the people in Solar did for Lucene. Or if you're talking about, say, ImageMagick, you could just interface with the command line API from Ruby. In general, there's the overhead of trying to build the interface there, whether it's over HTTP, over command line, the time it takes to shell out to that, or the time it takes to make the request, parse the XML coming back. But on the other hand, it's a well-defined interface. It's easy to use, and it works well in a lot of cases for most people. But for us, where performance is at a premium and we want the power to be able to be flexible and extend things, then really we're building bindings, and we're doing it in Java because it's quicker than doing it in C. So for you, it's a situational choice. The next thing that, and the last thing that I'm going to be talking about as an example for what we used Java and JRuby for is our spell checker. In the modern web engines, spell checking isn't like a document spell check where you're trying to find the word that is misspelled, that is closest to the word that is in the dictionary. So if you've got something, then you're looking for some sort of edit distance where it's you've got dog and It's spelled with an A, so it's dag, and so you look for something close to that and you find dog. You were looking over the user's history with no dictionary, no predefined dictionary, and we're seeing statistically throughout all web searches what makes sense. So it turns out to be a lot harder. You end up having to be really careful about your algorithm in order to make it happen within that total of a half second. You've got a very small slice in which to execute this. So performance is at a premium. In general, before you look at the performance of your language, you should probably look at the performance of your algorithms. If you're doing something in n-squared time that should be done in linear time, it really doesn't matter what language you're going to use when you're talking about a lot of data. That it's just the algorithm performance is just going to swamp whatever your language is. So, so we chose to implement this with ternary search try, which is a tree of very many nodes, one for each character, that you can look through to get quick lookups of words in a dictionary or in a corpus of documents or in a lot of just basically free text. You'll be able to find what words are there with some sort of frequency data about the words, and it's very, very fast. But the problem with it is you've got a lot of nodes. And each node, for each character, it ends up being millions of nodes. And the thing that might make sense if you're coming up against the same problem is to use, there's a library called, there's the Python TST library that is a port, and there's a C TST library, that both of which go out to C and are pretty efficient, but we had a lot of proprietary extensions that didn't really allow us this approach. So first we tried doing it in pure Ruby. And for 1 million nodes, creating a tree with those nodes, reading out of, say, a dictionary like just the user system dictionary on a Unix, we create 1 million nodes, and it takes about 10 seconds in Ruby to actually instantiate all those objects, which isn't terrible, but if, say, your server goes down, it's longer than we want it to be down on a restart, you're going to have to do this multiple times in different places, and it just was a bit much for what we wanted. And then you get to the problem of this could conceivably, we'd like to scale up to 10 million nodes, in which case the 170 megabytes of memory that Ruby was using, so 167 bytes per character I'm storing, there's a lot of overhead. So it just didn't make sense to do it in Ruby, primarily for that reason, just that if we got up to 10 million nodes, then we were talking about using over a gig of memory, well over a gig, and then Ruby starts to slow down somewhere in that range anyways. So I'm not sure whether that's object space related, where Ruby has to know where all the objects are in memory, but Ruby with a large number of objects gets really slow. So like I said, we could go to C, same reasons as before, didn't really want to go to C. We ended up building one in Java, and one of the things that we've been able to do is you can use a combination of JRuby and Java in your projects. And the thing that's been really successful for us is not doing I built a prototype of JRuby inline, which is similar to Ryan Davis's Ruby inline library, where you can basically write a class of pure Ruby, take out one of the methods, and basically reinsert, in his case, either a C or some other language method. So you can just have one method that's written in C or written in OCaml or written in something different, and presumably for performance or for some other reason, that will work to speed up your app. I've found that trying to do that is just a pain in Java. So trying to optimize some performance like this, one, I don't know that it would really get you what you need out of your memory overhead. But two, I found that in that case, it's really a pain to maintain. Java, in my experience, has worked really well for me when I've had really good tools to support it. And not having those tools, because I'm working in TextMate for my Ruby and trying to write this method in Java in the middle of it, it ends up being kind of a pain. And where do I import this? And now I've got to write something into the JRuby inline to import. And it's the best way to, in my experience, to be able to interface Java to Ruby is to take the types of data structures that you want, be able to pull them out and to be able to access them from Ruby and treat them, and you can even subclass them as the external Java object. You can subclass Java as a Ruby object, add some extra methods, add methods in Java to do a bulk load, so that way you've got a tight inner loop in Java, and you can still work with that Java in Ruby, but you're not going to be like mixing the two of them in the same file. So just to give you an idea of how fast things are for, this is kind of an arbitrary benchmark that we use because we do so much loading of things in and out of dictionaries and trying to figure out what words are where. This is what I've seen in performance for just this simple benchmark. We're basically taking the Unix system dictionary, we're throwing it into a hash set so that way you can do linear time lookups of words. So you can say, does this word exist in the dictionary very quickly? But to create this dictionary, here's an idea of how quickly the object creation times for that go. So the MRI, the standard Ruby, is 13 seconds. As of a couple weeks ago, running JRuby with the normal settings. That includes object space. So if you recall from, I believe it was covered at the JRuby keynote, that JRuby runs faster when you turn off this object space, this idea that you can introspect every object in existence. So with that off, it's twice as slow as MRI. You flip that back on, and you're going to get almost a 2x speed up, as you see at 10.9. And then you run in JServer mode, you're going to get another second out. So you can get down to 9 seconds off of Ruby's CRuby's standard of about 13. So 25-30% improvement. JRuby's still improving. I'm seeing that the performance benchmarks are going up, sometimes on a week-to-week basis, although that's probably conference-driven development over the last few weeks. But just to give you an idea of the high end, Java itself, if you were to do the same thing, write it in Java and then access that hash set from Ruby, you get the 4.1 seconds with much less memory overhead. And then in Perl, which is basically because that data structure is almost, it's written in C, much like the current MRI stuff is written in C, and it's pretty optimized. You get the same sort of 4-second response time, but with a much lower memory overhead. So at this point, I'm going to transition into talking about what it takes to get up and running with JRuby, some of the gotchas, some of the little things that I've learned as a part of my process. And the first thing I'd like to point out is that the install is really, really easy. Getting up and running and getting into IRB, et cetera, takes almost no time unless you're on this internet connection. So, but I almost did a live install, but that kind of killed it. So basically what I do is I personally work off of trunk. And at that point, you're looking at going to the site, you're looking at a subversion checkout. You change directory into the directory of your checkout, hit ant, and then move what you've got, the bin directory there, into your path, and you're basically done. At that point, it comes with the rubygems, and I believe rake by default. And the way you access those, because you have the conflicting namespace, is you prefix them with JRuby-S. So you can say JRuby-S gem install something or other, and unless it's a gem that requires a C extension, it will work. Some of the gems are ported to JRuby that do have C extensions, notably, I believe, Apricot. There's a few others. I'm losing off the top of my head. But there are a couple things that are missing from the standard JRuby install, and this is, I believe, a list of things on this JRuby Extras rubygems site. So if you go to like JRuby Extras on the rubygems project, you can see that notably it's missing the OpenSSL implementation, and it's missing the JDBC adapters for Active Record. So if you grab those, you can get started with basically what feels like a pretty standard Ruby installation. one of the things, that's also where the that gold spike gem is, and that is what enables you to package your Rails app as a WAR file. I already mentioned, don't use TextMate to program Java. It's a bad idea. One of the things you'll need in working with Java and Ruby at the same time is a sane build strategy. This includes a lot of things. In general, I haven't really had a need to, but I imagine it would be hard anyways. It is possible to write Java that is a subclass of Ruby rather than Ruby that is a subclass of Java, or to basically rely on Ruby as your kind of inner core and then like write Java that interfaces with it. But I just don't recommend it. I recommend using Java as the inner core and then using Ruby to interface with it, or going mostly Ruby. And so with that in mind, generally your code flow is going to be writing a Java library that is consumed by Ruby, or writing a series of Java APIs that are used inside of Ruby. So what you're trying to do in general with the build strategy is come up with something in Java that moves to Ruby. So I personally use Eclipse, and its auto build functionality, which is, I hear, a bad idea, but it happens to work for me. Take that, put it into a jar, and so now I've got all my Java libraries in a jar. And then what I do after that is I wrote a script called jar2gem.rb. And what happens is JRuby is able to import jars. So if you type require jar in your JRuby prompt, you will get that all the classes accessible from within that jar, accessible to you in JRuby. So what putting that jar into a gem does is when you require that gem, you get the jar. The reasons you want to do this is, one, you get the system-wide install of it, so that way you're not worried about like which projects need to go get that jar pushed to them. And two, you also get versioning that comes with the gem system on it. So you could say this package depends on version 1.2 of this gem. This one depends on maybe 1.4, and it solves a lot of headaches you have with including this jar into your Ruby library and not knowing which version you're on because you're managing two different namespaces there. The other thing I found helpful with that recently is timestamp on the end of it. So you have like major, minor timestamp, so you have a build number. One gotcha that I've had with using JRuby, and there's really only a couple, is casting can be tricky when you're trying to you're trying to call Java from JRuby. You're trying to move, for example, Ruby objects into a Java constructor. So you're saying like some Java class Ruby string. So I'm actually going to just drop out to terminal for a sec and try to just show that real quick. And one of the things that you're going to need to do is when you are, let me verify that I'm in JRuby actually. Interesting. Okay, now I can't see it. Excellent. I'll just look over there. So I'm in JRuby with required Java already done, I believe. And so what'll end up happening is, say I have an imaginary Java class that we're just going to call A, and we'll assume that I've already imported com.foo.a, so that way now I can see A. So let's assume that A has a constructor that takes a string, and you'd be fine just doing a.new some string. That would work. Now, some things are going to be harder to push across. For example, if you were going to try and say that the constructor takes a float, for example. So naively, you would go 1.99, and you'd expect that you'd be able to get a new A with 1.99 passed to that. But unfortunately, JRuby passes that in as a double, and that won't cast over to being a float. So you end up finding yourself doing things like either extending fixed num so that you have a toJava float method, or you can always just say java.lang float new 1.99, and you can get it across. That happens occasionally, but what really gets you is the arrays, because arrays in Ruby are untyped inherently, but arrays in Java are arrays of uniform objects. I believe that if you pass a Ruby array into Java, it will come in as an untyped array of Java objects, and in general, the constructor may expect an array of strings. So you may find out that you're doing something like this. And this is basically converting it to a typed Java array. And string being in the default namespace is fine, so it could be Java lang string as well, or anything else. Let's see, get back to toJava for the arrays is built in. So another thing that's convenient is talking from JRuby to CRuby. I tend to have a lot of daemons running at the same time, be they mongrels or custom search processes. And they actually communicate really well over DRB. I haven't had any problems recently. A few months ago, there was one or two issues. But recently connecting DRB in the standard way between JRuby and MRI. Of course, you're also available to do any sort of normal network types of things like multicast. I find it fun to set up like a multicast network of these things and just let them talk and configure themselves. So I'm basically done. These are a couple resources. The JRuby wiki is the first one. The IRC channel, which I conveniently did not list, is JRuby on irc.freenode. The developers of JRuby are in there quite often, and they're extremely helpful. And then there's the URL for the JRuby extras. And before I open up to questions, I'd just like to take a moment to thank the creators of JRuby for doing an excellent job and working so hard on the project. So Q&A. So the question was, if you want to never port anything because you feel like it's a bad idea, yet you want to see greater library support in Ruby because you like Ruby and want to see it succeed, how do you reconcile the two statements? It's a good question. Supporting is not the only option to add library support. You take a new stab at a problem with I feel like don't repeat yourself also extends to don't repeat anyone else if you can avoid it. And if you can use what's available in the open source community, I would hope that, for example, if Ruby added a search library, that it would bring something new to the discussion, rather than be a straight port of something existing that you couldn't bind to it, I suppose. I mean, I don't think they're completely contradictory. I just wanted to think of that. That's fine.
Actually, I got two questions. One, have you hit anything in JRuby you wanted to do that you couldn't in terms of Java integration? And two, did you all take a look at Groovy at all in considering languages?
Second again?
Groovy.
Oh, Groovy.
Did you evaluate Groovy at all?
The first question is there anything in Java that I couldn't do that I wanted to do? And the answer is yes, there is. But hopefully it will be fixed soon, and there were workarounds. The key thing that has really been missing out of the JRuby package is Ruby has always been great at Unix integration, things like changing my UID, setting up a PID file, figuring out what my PID is right now, changing the permissions on a file is doable now. But there's been things like that that have historically and are, in some cases, still a problem with interacting with some of the POSIX / Unix types of things. That's been a little bit problematic because Java itself was written to be platform agnostic, so it doesn't natively know about those things. JRuby team's working on those things pretty actively right now, and I don't expect it to be an issue for much longer. The second question is, did I look at Groovy? And having a Ruby background, no. So, yeah.
Those benchmarks you gave, which JVM
are you using? Sun 1.5.
Did you look at any others?
No. Sorry, let me repeat the question. The question was which JVM, and that was the Sun Java 1.5 shipping with OS X. And did I look at any other JVMs for the benchmarks? No, and they're somewhat off the cuff too. So, any more questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Oh, sorry. One more question. Where? Oh, sorry, I missed it, Nick.
What your deployment infrastructure is like. Do you deploy to Max as well, or what do you run JRuby on the servers?
Oh, the question was deployment-wise, what are we running? We are running Debian. I forget what version, and we are running one of the package maintainers is on the either unstable edge, unfree. I'm not really sure what's the non-free version. We're running the Sun JVM on those. We're running all of our JRuby processes at the moment as standalone daemons, not in some sort of Java app server container sort of thing.
Java developers have had a similar challenge at a lower level. When you change something in Java, you drop down to C using JNI, like the operating system type thing. I guess is that possible? You drop from Ruby to Java when you have to, and drop from Java to C when you really, really have to?
I suppose it's possible that we could easily get into a situation. The question was, would you consider dropping to C if Java proved insufficient? Because in the past, that's what Java developers themselves have had to do. And I suppose that is certainly a possibility. My answer for the moment is I'd prefer to throw more hardware at it. But in reality, that could be, in certain cases, a possibility of doing, in which case I would probably end up doing that. Yeah.
I have a question, but with your introduction, I'm sure, well, let me say, have you done anything with Java integrating with legacy Java systems? And
Integrating with what?
Experience with integrating with Java legacy systems. So you go into a shop and they've got this whole Java system, and you want to put Ruby on top of that to interface. Have you had any experience with that?
The question was, have I experience interfacing JRuby with an existing non-greenfield Java application that was written by someone else, probably like as a consultant or something like that, and I have not.
Is there anyone in the room who has that might be able to speak to that? Okay. From the room, but all of the legacy Java code.
What type of integration are you? Do you want a mic?
We haven't really run into issues with legacy Java. I think our biggest issue so far is for deployment, we need to deploy pure Java. So the sysadmin there don't know anything about JRuby. And we run into, it's not problems, just we have to kind of work around, kind of bridge the way Rails does things in Java. We're still kind of working.
So I believe with the legacy concerns thing, where JRuby 1.0 is 1.4 compatible, and JRuby 1.1 moves to 1.5 compatibility as a minimum, which may influence integrating with older systems that have 1.4 requirements. So throw that out there.
One of the big sort of performance concerns with Ruby is because it doesn't have a virtual machine. There are virtual machines, but there's no sort of standard one. But as that changes and as there becomes a faster virtual machine for Ruby native language, do you see yourself sticking with JRuby because it sort of blew back to Java, or do you guys see yourself
I feel like the question is, as a native Ruby project gets better and better with having a quality VM or compiler or interpreter, do you think that you'll find yourself moving away from JRuby? When it comes to performance, yes, there's definitely systems that we write in a combination of JRuby and Java for the performance considerations of that system. But there's also places where, because of the library support that we've wanted off of the Java side, and how easy JRuby is made to integrate with that the fact that there are faster Ruby virtual machines that are native out there doesn't really change that part of the equation. All right, I think we're out of time. So,
final question?
One more? Okay.
Can you tell us just a little bit more about what your application is going to do and stuff? You said video search. Is it actually searching the data within the video, or?
So just a general question about what Casttv does, what the app does. We are doing web-wide video search. So we're going across YouTube, iTunes, ABC, NBC, the wide web in general, just basically covering everything. And the question was, do we search also in the video or around the video? We do a variety of things. We search in the video both from an audio and from a visual perspective, as well as metadata around it and other information that we discover through other ways. So, yeah. All right. Thank you.